I came home earlier than expected that afternoon because my meeting had been canceled. I actually felt happy while driving back, thinking I would surprise my husband, Coulter, and maybe suggest we go out for dinner. When I walked into the house, it felt strangely quiet. At first I thought Coulter had gone out, but then I heard low voices coming from the guest bedroom. My heart started beating faster because something about those voices felt wrong. I slowly walked down the hallway. The closer I got, the clearer the whispers became. One of the voices sounded like my sister Brenna. She had been living with us for a while after her difficult divorce, and I had always tried to support her. But hearing her voice behind that closed door made my stomach tighten. I pushed the door open. For a second, everything stopped. Coulter and Brenna were standing too close to each other, both looking shocked to see me there. The expressions on their faces told me everything I needed to know before anyone even said a word. My chest felt heavy, like the air had suddenly disappeared from the room. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, staring at the two people I trusted most in the world. In that moment, I realized something painful. My husband and my own sister had been hiding something behind my back. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. What they didn't realize was that this moment wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of what I planned to do next. Brenna had always been more than just my sister. When we were younger, we shared the same room, the same secrets, and the same dreams about what our lives would look like when we grew up. Even when we became adults, we stayed close. When her marriage fell apart 2 years ago, she was completely devastated. I was the one who told her she could stay with us as long as she needed. I wanted her to feel safe again. At the time, Coulter agreed, without hesitation. He even told me that family should always help each other during hard moments. Hearing him say that made me feel lucky to have such a supportive husband. Brenna moved into our guest room, and for a while everything seemed normal. But looking back now, I can see that things slowly started to change. Coulter and Brenna began spending more time talking when I wasn't around. Sometimes I would walk into the kitchen, and they would suddenly stop their conversation. Other times, I would hear them laughing together in the living room late at night. When I asked what they were talking about, they would just say it was nothing important. At first, I didn't think much about it. I trusted both of them completely. Brenna was my sister, and Coulter was the man I had promised to spend my life with. The idea that they could betray me like that never even crossed my mind. But small moments started to feel strange. Brenna would defend Coulter during little disagreements between us. Coulter also seemed unusually protective of her feelings, even when the situation had nothing to do with her. I ignored all of those signs because believing everything was normal felt easier than questioning the two people I loved the most. Now I understand that sometimes the truth is right in front of us, but we choose not to see it. After I saw them together in that room, my mind felt completely numb. For a few seconds, none of us said anything. Coulter looked like he wanted to explain, and Brenna looked like she might start crying, but I didn't give either of them the chance to speak. Instead, I slowly stepped back and closed the door again. I walked out of the house, without saying a single word. I could hear Coulter calling my name behind me, but I kept walking. My hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to unlock my car. Once I finally started driving, I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get away from that house. For hours, I drove around the city. My thoughts were all over the place. Part of me wanted to go back and scream at them. Another part of me wanted to pretend none of this had happened. The pain felt heavy, like something sitting on my chest that wouldn't move. But as time passed, the shock slowly turned into something else. I started thinking carefully about what had happened. If I went back home angry and emotional, they would probably deny everything. They might twist the story, make excuses, or try to convince me that I misunderstood what I saw. I knew how easily people could change the truth when they felt cornered. That's when a different idea began to form in my mind. Instead of reacting right away, I decided to stay quiet. I realized that if I stayed calm and patient, I could learn the full truth about what was really going on between them. And if there was more to their betrayal, I would eventually see it. By the time the sun started setting, my tears had stopped. In their place was something colder, and much more controlled. I wasn't going to explode in anger. I was going to wait. When I finally returned home that evening, the house felt strangely calm. Coulter was sitting on the couch watching television, and Brenna was in the kitchen pretending to clean. For a moment, it almost looked like an ordinary evening, as if nothing had happened earlier that day. Coulter looked up at me and smiled nervously. He asked how my meeting went, as if he truly expected me to answer normally. Brenna kept her back turned toward me, quietly moving dishes around that were already clean. I realized in that moment that they didn't know how much I had seen. Without making any noise, I reached for the small lock on the outside of the fitting room door and turned it. The door clicked shut from the outside. Inside, I could hear sudden movement and quiet voices, confused about why the door wouldn't open. I stepped away calmly and walked toward the front of the store where the manager was standing. In a calm voice, I explained that two people seemed to have locked themselves inside a fitting room together and might need help getting out. Within seconds, employees started moving toward the back of the store. And the moment they opened that door, everything was about to change. The store employees quickly walked toward the fitting rooms after hearing what I said. One of them knocked on the door first, asking if everything was okay inside. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard Coulter's voice from behind the door saying the lock seemed stuck. By then, a few customers nearby had started paying attention. People slowed down, watching the small scene that was beginning to form. The employee tried the handle but couldn't open it easily. Another worker came with a key used for the fitting room locks. The hallway slowly filled with curious eyes. When the door finally opened, Coulter stepped out first. His face looked pale and tense. Right behind him came Brenna, still adjusting the dress she had been trying on. The moment they realized how many people were standing there watching them, their expressions changed completely.
No one had to say anything.
The situation spoke for itself. Some of the customers exchanged quiet looks, while a few employees stared awkwardly, unsure what to say. Coulter looked at me immediately, his face filled with panic. Brenna's eyes dropped to the floor, clearly realizing how bad the moment looked. I stood there calmly, not raising my voice, not accusing anyone. Coulter started walking toward me as if he wanted to explain, but the words didn't seem to come out properly. Brenna stayed where she was, looking embarrassed and nervous. For weeks they had been hiding their secret behind closed doors. Now, in a simple clothing store surrounded by strangers, the truth had stepped out into the open where neither of them could control the story anymore. And for the first time since that day at home, they were the ones who didn't know what to do next. Coulter quickly walked toward me, his face full of panic. He kept saying my name, trying to get my attention, as if he believed he could still explain everything. But I already knew there was nothing he could say that would change the truth. I raised my hand slightly, stopping him before he could come any closer. In a calm voice, I told him that I already understood everything. There was no anger in my tone anymore, just a quiet certainty. The past few weeks had given me enough time to accept what had happened. Coulter tried to speak again, saying it wasn't what it looked like. But those words sounded empty even to him. Brenna finally stepped forward too, tears forming in her eyes. She started apologizing, saying she never meant to hurt me. I looked at both of them for a moment. These were the two people I had trusted more than anyone else in my life. One was my husband, the person I had promised to build a future with. The other was my sister, someone I had protected and supported for years. And yet they had chosen to betray me together. I told Coulter quietly that our marriage was over. There was no argument, no long explanation. The decision had already been made in my mind long before this moment. Brenna tried to say something again, but I didn't respond. Some betrayals don't need another conversation. I turned around and walked toward the exit of the store. The air outside felt strangely calm compared to the tension inside. As I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in weeks, the heavy feeling inside my chest had finally begun to disappear. The months that followed were not easy, but they were clear. After that day, Coulter tried many times to contact me. He called, sent messages, and even asked mutual friends to speak to me for him. But I had already made my decision. I didn't respond to any of it. I filed for divorce soon after. The process took some time, but by then my feelings were no longer confused. What once felt like the center of my life had already ended the moment I opened that bedroom door weeks earlier. Brenna moved out shortly after the incident at the store. She didn't try to contact me again. In many ways, that silence said more than any apology could have. Losing a sister was painful, but I knew I couldn't keep someone in my life who had chosen to betray me so deeply. At first, the house felt empty without them. There were quiet moments when memories came back and reminded me of how things used to be. But slowly, those memories stopped feeling painful. Instead, I began focusing on rebuilding my life. I spent more time with people who had always supported me. I started doing small things I had once put aside, like traveling and exploring new hobbies. The more time passed, the more I realized something important. The day I came home early had felt like the worst moment of my life. But looking back, it was also the moment that opened my eyes. It showed me the truth about the people around me and gave me the chance to move forward without lies or betrayal. Sometimes the end of one chapter feels painful, but it can also be the quiet beginning of a much better life. So I decided to play along. I smiled lightly and told Coulter the meeting had gone fine. My voice sounded calm, even though inside I felt completely different. Brenna finally turned around and gave me a quick glance, but she avoided looking directly into my eyes. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument could have been. Over the next few days, I acted the same way I always had. I cooked dinner, talked about normal things, and behaved as if everything in my life was perfectly fine.
But inside, I had changed.
I started paying attention to things I had never noticed before. I watched how Coulter and Brenna behaved when they thought I wasn't looking. I noticed how quickly their conversations stopped whenever I entered a room. I noticed how Brenna sometimes disappeared from the house for an hour or two, always returning right before Coulter came home from work. They thought they were being careful. But when someone is hiding something, the small details begin to stand out. Every day, I quietly observed them, learning more about their behavior. I didn't ask questions, and I didn't show suspicion. Because the more comfortable they felt, the more careless they became. And the more careless they became, the closer I got to understanding everything they had been hiding from me. As the days passed, the small details I noticed slowly started connecting together. At first they seemed like tiny coincidences, but the more I paid attention, the clearer the picture became. One evening, Coulter left his laptop open on the dining table while he went to take a shower. Normally, I would never look through his things, but after what I had seen, curiosity pushed me to glance at the screen. There were a few messages open that immediately made my heart sink. They weren't long conversations, just short sentences, but they were enough to show there was something hidden between him and Brenna. Later that week, I noticed a restaurant receipt in Coulter's jacket pocket. The date on it was from a night he told me he had stayed late at work. What made it worse was that the receipt showed a dinner for 2 people. Brenna had also been out of the house that same evening. Little by little, the truth started becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It hadn't just started recently either. Their behavior suggested that whatever was happening between them had been going on for months. Every new detail hurt, but at the same time it gave me something else, certainty. Now I knew that what I saw that day wasn't a misunderstanding. They had both been lying to me for a long time. Instead of confronting them, I stayed patient. I kept watching, collecting quiet pieces of the truth. The more I learned, the more determined I became that when the moment finally came, they wouldn't be able to deny anything. They thought they were hiding their secret carefully. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves when someone starts looking closely enough. And by then, I was watching everything. After realizing how long they had been lying to me, I stopped feeling shocked. Instead, my thoughts became very clear. I didn't want another quiet discovery or another hidden message to confirm the truth. I wanted a moment where neither of them could hide behind excuses. So, I began thinking about how to create that moment. One evening during dinner, I casually brought up the idea of taking a short weekend trip together. I said it might be a good way to celebrate Brenna finally finding a new apartment and preparing to move out soon. Both of them looked a little surprised at first, but then they quickly agreed. Coulter even said it sounded like a great idea. Their reaction told me something important. They believed I suspected nothing. Over the next few days, I planned the trip carefully. I suggested we visit a quiet shopping district a few hours outside the city. It was known for small boutiques and clothing stores, the kind where people spend time trying on outfits and walking from shop to shop. Brenna seemed excited about the idea of shopping, and Coulter didn't question it at all. While they talked about the trip like it was a normal weekend getaway, I quietly thought about the exact moment I was waiting for. I wasn't looking for a loud argument or a dramatic confrontation at home. I wanted something different, something that would leave no space for lies. When the weekend finally arrived, we drove there together. The entire time, they acted relaxed and comfortable, laughing and talking like nothing in the world was wrong. But as I watched them, I realized something. They believed their secret was completely safe. They believed they had already gotten away with everything. What they didn't know was that the moment I had been preparing for us getting closer, with every step we took. And soon, there would be no way for them to hide. When we arrived at the shopping district, everything looked calm and ordinary. Small stores lined the street, and people were walking around enjoying the weekend. Brenna looked excited as she moved from one boutique to another, picking up dresses and holding them against herself in the mirrors. Coulter followed behind us, acting relaxed and helpful. Inside one of the clothing stores, Brenna grabbed several outfits and said she wanted to try them on. The store had a small row of fitting rooms near the back. She walked into one of them and pulled the curtain closed. Coulter stood nearby, pretending to look through a rack of clothes. I watched quietly. A few moments later, Brenna's voice came from behind the curtain saying she needed help with a zipper on one of the dresses. Coulter glanced at me for a second and then stepped toward the fitting room like it was the most normal thing in the world. He slipped inside. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I walked slowly toward the fitting room area and looked around. The hallway was empty, and the store employees were busy near the front counter.